to be successful in business, you have to have values. You have to stand by those values. And you can't compromise those values, but you also have to have the tools to do that. So what do I mean by that? Well, it's what you've been teaching me all these years. It's, you have to, whether it's meditation or other forms of self-exploration, you have to have a way to shed the stress, and to really dive into what's important.
Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Heart Wisdom here on Ram Dass's Be Here Now Network. I'm Ganesh Bremiller, here to introduce Jack Kornfield, along with his guest, the executive chairman of the Ford Motor Company, Bill Ford. I did not expect this to be Jack's podcast guest this time around, but Jack always surprises me with the amount of people he knows in different scenes, and I think that's something really special about Jack, that very much like Ram Dass with his social venture capitalist network, Jack was okay talking with the hippies in the 60s. He is okay also sitting down with highly professional businessmen and shedding his light into a sector that probably doesn't have as much consciousness as the general populace listening to Heart Wisdom, let's say. And that's not to say that there isn't conscious business. That's just to say the way the system is set up right now is very much take everything that you can get, not caring so much about who you're stepping on to get there. So it's really cool, actually, to hear what the executive chairman of Ford, Bill Ford, has to share about his relationship with meditation and mindfulness and values and the next generation. It was surprising to me, and I hope it's surprising to you as well. And I have to let you know that this conversation was originally recorded for the Inner MBA program presented by Sounds True. So before diving into this amazing content, I do want to let you know this is maybe your last chance to sign up for Jack's new Stories course, at least for the on-demand live version, where you'll have the opportunity to be in online Sangha with Jack twice throughout the course. So this is Transform Your Life through Jack Kornfield's Most Powerful Stories, a 10-hour journey. And it's Jack's hand-picked favorite stories from his teaching career that are meant to transform the mind and open the heart. If you sign up before September 28th, you will receive 2 live question and answer sessions with Jack and the student body to go into the themes of the stories, and also just to be able to be in Sangha around this very unique and cool offering. And I would also like to inform you that Jack will be back with his Monday night Dharma talk for Spirit Rock on October 16th. That will be online. And there's also another amazing Spirit Rock offering he's giving with his beloved Trudy Goodman, who I'm sure you know well. This is called Loving Presence, Compassion, and a Joyful Heart, and it takes place on November 4th. Again, it's online and in support of Spirit Rock. So there we are. I just wanted to thank you so much for always showing up and always offering your divine and kind attention here. And I would like to now open the door to Jack Kornfield and Bill Ford in this amazing podcast, Heart Wisdom, episode 206, Capitalism, Right Livelihood, and the Next Generation. May you be well. May you be happy. May you help others through the authenticity of your own being. And may your heart smile. Namaste, y'all.
It is a real pleasure to sit here with Bill. We've been friends for a dozen years or longer. Maybe. And I'll tell you about him and then how we met. No, I'll go backwards. We met because I got a contact from Bill. He'd been a student of meditation and mindfulness, and listening to talks that I gave or reading things. And then he contacted me at one point, and it was back in 2008 when the economy was melting down, and you said, it was possible that you would lose your grandfather's company and the entire industry on your watch. And in fact, Ford was the only major company that had the foresight to actually put money in the bank, to borrow a lot of money so that you didn't have to get the government to bail you out.
Right.
So you were saying, this makes a little wee bit of stress in his life and trouble sleeping. What you got? Is there anything that can help? And we started this conversation about what meditation practices would do. But then as I got to know you, what I understood is that you've been, I'll call it a servant leader for decades. And to me, what that means is that your role as a leader has been to look for what's the best good that you can offer to the people in the company, the people it serves, and to the world. And that meant, among other things, that you were one of the earliest major figures in industry to stand up for the climate. We'll just use that as an example and say we really have to pay attention to what's happening to the climate. And what happened is you got attacked and slammed for a good 10 or 20 years or more. It was not a small thing. This is kind of an amazing thing to know and have that sense of integrity that I know this is important and these are my values. And in some way, people at Ford love this man because they trust your values. They know you worked on the assembly line, and I know what you care for. And that just, that's the whole game in some way.
Well, thank you, Jack. Thank you very much. And I guess it's my turn to introduce Jack, right? Who needs no introduction. But, so if I could I won't do it justice, so I won't even try. But Jack is, as you all know, probably the leading American Buddhist and also scholar. But much more than that, he's someone who's touched people's lives all around the world. Famous people, young people, people with horrific problems, people with that can't get out of their own head. I mean, Jack has touched every one of those, and really many, many of them. And so, it's very. But what's most remarkable about Jack is he's also very much in the moment. You can talk to Jack about the NFL game that happened yesterday. You can talk to Jack about what's new in music. And then very easily go right into some very deep conversations about inner exploration, Buddhism, mindfulness, and all those things. And so he's just a remarkable person. And as Jack said, we've become good friends over the years. And actually, Jack, I probably the only time I've ever corrected you. It was when I read your book, A Path with Heart, and I called up. I love the book so much that I called information because it said the author lives in Woodacre, California, and I called the information. I said, "Hey, do you have a Jack Kornfield?" And they said, "Yes, we do." So I called you, and so. And then I came up.
So old-fashioned, I love it.
Well, this is before Google searches and everything, and so this is many years ago. And so I went up to Spirit Rock and met Jack, and then we've become, I really admired him, and then from that point on, we started to deepen our relationship and deepen the work we've done together. And I must say, I've been running Ford for 25 years now. And there have been some just, really, really ugly times. And Jack, one thing he always told me was, I know you want to take care of everyone else, but if you don't take care of yourself first, you're not going to be doing anybody else any good. And that really was so important to me because I was so frazzled and didn't have any way to manage it. And you gave me those tools, and it wasn't just meditation. It was the questions you asked. It was the kind of the things you made me think about. And by the way, it's been a lot of fun too.
What does someone need who's in the business world? Here we're talking about the inner MBA, and you are a guest lecturer at MIT or at Wharton and so forth, and noticing that people in the old days, it was just, let's get our education, let's get the economics, let's do our case studies, let's run a business. And that doesn't work anymore for people. And I'll just say something kind of personal. So when I left Dartmouth College and I had a good Ivy League education, philosophy and mathematics and history, and I was doing pre-med, lots of good science. And then I switched to Asian studies, which became my new industry, whatever. And went into the Buddhist monastery. I learned about forgiveness. No one taught me that. I learned how to deal with my own anger because my father was violent and I didn't know what to do with all that rage. I learned how to deal with my own longing and desires or fears. No one taught me any of that my whole inner life. It was as if I had the second half of my education that was missing then. And now what you're saying is for business school or business leaders, there's a different education that's needed.
Well, there has to be. I mean, I think, business is the easy stuff. Once you, and I must tell you that, in all my time at top of Ford, if I were to think of all the most difficult things I've had to deal with, they're all people. And it's people, and it's wrestling with interpersonal relationships, it's wrestling with, and rather than get angry at them, you have to try and understand them and where they're coming from, and you have to be empathetic. And when you do that, often what you get back is, no one's ever treated me like this. And that's a shame. But I do think that, to be successful in business, you have to have values. You have to stand by those values. And you can't compromise those values, but you also have to have the tools to do that. So what do I mean by that? Well, it's what you've been teaching me all these years. It's, you have to, whether it's meditation or other forms of self-exploration, you have to have a way to shed the stress, and to really dive into what's important. So it's really a two-pronged thing. It's a set of values, but then it's also, for lack of a better term, a coping mechanism that people have to have. And ultimately that will, I believe, result in much better interpersonal relationships, which all of business is really about. It just is. People, it's not about return on investment or, whether we launch this product or launch that product. That's the easy stuff. But it's all the other stuff that will give you the stamina to see it through. And I think you see so much burnout now, and particularly with MBA students, because there's great pressure on them. Often it's financial pressure. Often it's pressure from home to succeed. And it's their own expectations of, they're going to these schools and then they're told, now you need to go out and be great. And they're like, wait, how do I be great? What does that mean? And so I think that the business schools in general desperately need this kind of program. And most of them don't have it.
Yeah, I was invited to go to Stanford Business School some years ago by one of the assistant deans and by a senior faculty member to do an event for the entire student body on the very things that we're talking about, and particularly about well-being and vision and what matters to you. And so I said, well, I can't do that alone. And I called in some favors, which was the CEO of Monsanto at the time and the COO of, I think, Mattel, and so some pretty notable level business leaders, and Rachel Remen, who's a physician who's worked for years at Stanford and elsewhere to humanize medicine and medical curriculum. And so we did some meditations together, and people talked about the leaders talked about what they learned. And then these people, so smart, so good, who are all there, like at the top of their game, they're the cream of the crop. And the dean had called me and he said, the problem is that they come in and they're raring to go. And by the time they're ready to get in a corporation, they've lost something. And I said, well, what have they lost? He said, they don't know who they are. They've lost their values. I said, so you want something like soul retrieval? And the dean said, yeah, that's what we're looking for. It was a very funny conversation. So at the end, the ones on stage would say, all right, I made $150 million. I wasn't happy. Somebody else raised their hand. I made this. I wasn't that happy. And the look on the faces of people saying, well, what makes you happy? And that was a question. It wasn't that they didn't want to do good, and it wasn't that they didn't have a tremendous creative impulse, but they didn't know the human cost and the way to navigate it in some way.
And I would say, Jack, too, that if employees have that, and they also believe in the values that you set forth as a leader, it makes a much better company, a much stronger company, as well as stronger individuals. And I can give you a very vivid example. You referenced earlier the 2008, the financial crisis, and our two big competitors, General Motors and Chrysler, went bankrupt. And we were, hanging on the very edge. And interesting time, because I got called to the White House and asked if we would take either GM or Chrysler, and I told President Obama no. He wasn't very happy with me. But I said that because I said, if it's too much, we'll go bankrupt too. If you're asking us to take on, more obligations, But anyway. It was interesting what happened then, and this will always stick with me forever. Our employees simply wouldn't let us fail, and it didn't happen at GM and Chrysler. I was told at Friday night at 5:00 at GM and Chrysler, you could shoot a cannon down the hall and not hit anybody. Our employees were working till midnight, 1 a.m. They were working all day Saturday, all day Sundays. They weren't sure they were going to have a job on Monday morning. They didn't get any overtime. But I was flooded with emails and letters from employees saying, hey, Bill, don't give up. We can do this. Now, those were from the factory floor. They were from people in lower management. And I got hundreds and hundreds of them. And normally those messages are top down. But they were coming to me and it just showed me that the love that people had for our company and kind of what we stood for. And they pulled us through. I mean, they absolutely pulled us through. And as you point out, we didn't go bankrupt and we didn't take the bailout. And it was because of, I think, the way our employees felt about our company. And if I could just give you one more quick example, it was, okay, so now fast forward, COVID hits. And without even asking, our company stopped making cars. And immediately, we started making gowns, respirators, masks, ventilators. And nobody asked for permission. Nobody asked what it was going to cost. And we just did it. And, and I was so proud. And then somebody said, well, should we have asked you? I said, absolutely not. Because that shows that the values are actually being lived and believed, that, when we're needed, we respond, and, to whatever is needed at the time. And, and so I think that if you have values and people understand them and they embrace them, and values are different than culture. Cultures change all the time inside companies. And culture is what's needed to deliver the business. So if you need to go faster, you need to be leaner, you need whatever it is, that can be part of your culture. But the values sit above that. And I think most companies don't either have it or don't talk about it. But we do, we talk about it a lot, and we encourage our employees to live it a lot. I started something called the Volunteer Corps, which allows all our employees around the world to go do whatever they want to do to help the world. It can be something small like, help your local school, with a playground, or it can be something like disaster relief in Turkey when the earthquake hits. The reason I did that was I noticed that whenever we had a sign up for some volunteer thing, not only were all the slots filled, but people were writing below it, hoping that they could. And I thought, well, okay, let's institutionalize this. Let's not just, ask to do it on ad hoc. But it's something that it's real, it's enduring, and people want to feel part of something that's more than a paycheck, or more than a stock option, or more than, if it's just money, it's not good enough. And it's something that I hope we never lose.
So what you're talking about also resonates within Buddhist teaching what's called right livelihood,
Yes.
which is the livelihood that not only doesn't cause harm, but somehow uses the energy of your life, your incarnation, to bring benefit in four ways: to yourself, to your community, to the environment around you, all those kind of things. So I'm going to up-level the question and make it harder, because you wrestle with hard questions. A lot of current capitalism doesn't have good social values, and doesn't have really guarding rules for it. I was looking at a book called Capitalism in a World on Fire by Rebecca Henderson from MIT and Harvard Business School. And it was basically what we know, saying that if you don't have built in, as you say, a lever of values, it will undermine the whole society. So how do you vision? This is a little bit like the bodhisattva intention. If you go to the sort of heart of it, if you take a bodhisattva vow, it's, I will do the work or whatever I do, but my intention is to be of benefit, not just for myself, but in the weave that we share. What do you see about capitalism at this point?
Well, it's interesting because, and I'll get to that in just a second, but, corporations in general, I mean, as much as I like to believe, and I do believe that Ford is a good company and dedicated to doing good things, I know right now, somewhere in the Ford world, that some bad thing is happening. And it just is. And so the question is not how do you ever prevent that from happening, but the question is, how do you deal with it when you find it? And what are the set of expectations that you have for, discovering bad behavior? And that bad behavior can take all kinds of different forms, right? I mean, it can be financial malfeasance, it can be personal bad behavior, it could be, lying. I mean, it could be anything. And it happens, and it's because it's people, and people aren't perfect, and corporations certainly aren't perfect. But then it is, okay, you must bring it to light, and you must deal with it, and you must deal with it in a way that people are satisfied with the way you deal with it. And I think that kind of gets to the question, which is, if you do that and you do have values, you smooth the rough edges or off of capitalism in terms of the bad behavior, right? But we have morphed capitalism, I believe, into, and it happened really in the last 20 years, into a power grab and a greed grab that kind of didn't exist when I was younger. And maybe it did, but it wasn't celebrated. It's celebrated in the last 20 years. I mean, that really bothers me. It's, how much money did you make, and who did you have to step over to do it, and and I think that part of capitalism is terrible, and I don't want to pin it on Silicon Valley, because that wouldn't be fair, but I think it was exacerbated by a lot of the early success that happened in Silicon Valley, and the quick money and the stock options and the competitiveness that, and it really became our in some ways the American business ethos, which it shouldn't be. But so I don't think in capital, because when I look at other forms of economic activity, I still think the roots of capitalism are the best thing that we have. But it does require then society to build around it safety nets. It requires society to build compassion, so that that the money made with capitalism is deployed in a thoughtful and kind manner. But when I look at other forms, they all have big flaws too, and in some cases, bigger flaws. But I don't like what capitalism has become. And I'm hopeful that this next generation will pull us back from that. Because I think the values that a lot of the next generation have are much closer to maybe what the great generation, the post-World War II generation had in terms of being more selfless, less about me, and what I can get all the time.
Yeah, some of it's grown in these last decades. I've watched it too as an outsider, but the kind of economics that came from the University of Chicago and Milton Friedman and so forth, whereas the premise is your goal is to make as much money as possible. Yep. And it doesn't matter more or less how you do it.
Right.
And then the outcome is that companies get destroyed or communities can get destroyed.
No question.
At the same time, the energy of uplifting people to say, you can make a difference, you can build a business or work for one and make some, that's tremendously empowering. So how do we navigate those? And part of it, as you said, is actually, it's not just a reform of capitalism, but it's the society's values. And that we have to actually say as a society, we will take care of our children. Mm-hmm. We will educate them in ways, that are necessary, that produce a beautiful future, in spite of the fact that it will cost everyone some money. And so somehow we have to relearn. And I was telling you in the meditation retreats that I teach, one of the good things is that the youngest generation who come don't want to learn meditation as an interior practice alone. Okay, I can manage my stress, I can forgive what I need to, I can live with more, loving kindness and so forth. They don't want to do it unless it's also connected with, will this help with the climate crisis? Mm-hmm. Will this help with continuing racism? Can I learn something that's not apart from the world, but that actually these are weighing on my heart, and I want to learn how to do both in some way? And so you're sort of positing that, but I haven't seen it. I'm hoping you're right about the next generation.
Well, I think you just said it, though. They are asking those questions, which prior generations weren't asking. And I think that's very hopeful, that if they can have the inner journey and connect it to some greater societal need, that's wonderful. I mean, if that is the way the next generation is coming at it, it's very different. And to me, that gives me a lot of hope.
Do you see that at Ford? Is there a new generation coming saying we want the company to succeed and we really want to be a force for good in the world somehow?
Yes, but I don't think that's just generational. I actually think everybody wants that. Not just at Ford. I think everybody wants to feel like they belong to something that is greater than themselves, that stands for something that they're proud of. But what I think is different is the younger generation want to be involved now. It's like, okay, I get it now. Tell me what I can do and how I can do it. And we have to, so we spend a lot of time figuring out how do we enable them to go do these things. It was really interesting. We had I also have this group called 30 Under 30 that I put together with our 30 employees under the age of 30. And I spent a year with them teaching them kind of, for lack of a better word, how to be a philanthropist. How do you do things in the community that really make a difference? Well, it was really interesting because the first class, I brought them to like the traditional things like United Way and Salvation Army and all those older groups. And when I say older, I mean old, they've been long established. But interestingly, these young people, at the end, they all present to me, and they have the sponsoring organization with them too. And it was really interesting when the Salvation Army people and the young people came, that every group, whether it was United Way, Salvation Army, and all the others, said, we learned way more from them than they learned from us. Mm. And by the way, we're having to change our entire model because our average volunteer is 68 years old, and we're going to be out of business in 10 years if that continues. And so we are, these young people have taught us that we are completely out of touch. Even though our mission was good, it's not enough. And what we really need to do is create a sense of community, which we haven't done. And so it really, to me, it was fascinating, that very first class that we did, with those 30 under 30 because it showed me that the young people have so much to offer, but they're not interested in joining in a traditional way a group like United Way or Salvation Army unless they can radically change it.
So one of the things that you do, and that I also spend a lot of time doing, is mentoring other people. You mentor the leaders at Ford and then the ones under them, or even the 30 under 30. And you're really interested in some way in how do you, if you're a leader and you're doing an inner MBA and you want to get in business, it's not only, how do you lead well, but how do you bring the best out of other people? It's one of the things that I've learned to do and love doing because I look at them and I see this person has some gifts. My old friend Malidoma Somé, who was a West African shaman, medicine man who had a couple of PhDs from the Sorbonne and I think from Michigan, said that in the Dagara people, we believe that every child who's born carries a certain cargo. And I love this metaphor because cargo, it's like the cargo ships that ply the rivers in West Africa. And their job on earth is to deliver their cargo, deliver the particular gift that was given to them. So when I mentor people, as much as asking what they're interested in or how they're doing it, I'll have them close their eyes and say, visualize yourself some decades now. What will you regret? What image in there, do you remember that inspired you? Do you still have that? And I start to look and help them look at what their passion is and so forth. And then I say, the most important thing is you can do this. Probably the most important mentoring moment is to see their value and to say, this is possible. So I'm just talking about my sense of mentoring. What is yours?
Well, I actually would like to keep you going on this because you do mentor so many people, and you mentor, young people, old people, and also prominent business people. And that's something that, that there are a lot of egos. There are a lot of different myths that people create around themselves. And so how do you pierce that? And how do you bring out the best in them? Because some of the people that I know you work with, and you work with a wide variety of people that have kind of made it, whether it's in entertainment or business, there are a lot of big egos that go with that. And one of the things that you do is challenge people so well. But how do you get through to them, and how do you turn them if they're not where they should be?
Well, one of the things, I'm not sure whether I should say I'm sorry to say it or not, because I'm not completely sorry. In Tibetan Buddhist practice, there is a practice for those who are sincere in which you pray for suffering. You say, grant that I will have enough suffering that it will cause me to open the great heart of compassion.
Interesting.
The people that I do work with, and I'll name one who's a mutual friend just because some of it's public. So we did something in Wall Street Journal or whatever, like John Donahoe when he was the CEO of eBay and PayPal. Now he's the CEO of Nike. When he talked to me, he was desperate.
Yeah.
There are others who call me, and it's, for my industry, that's great. I mean, I don't wish it for them, but it's like, okay, it's not business as usual.
Right.
Things are falling apart, or, I have this many $1 billion, my marriage is falling apart,
right,
which I get that as much as anything, or my kids have gone off the rails or something. Help. And that becomes actually a turning point in that person's life. It becomes a gateway to say, just what we're talking about, it can't be business as usual. In some way, I actually have to come to terms with what made my marriage, dissolve and brought the bitterness. And how do I resolve that now with my children? Or I have to figure out, I've been working in a way these 18 hours a week, and nobody's happy.
Right.
So I get the game, when it's halfway through and there's been a lot of injuries.
Yeah. No, that's right.
And one of the things that I do when I work with people, I listen to the story because we all have our stories, and they're mostly not true, but that's because most stories aren't true. They're only partial, right? But I more often want to have people close their eyes and turn inward and say, where do you feel that in your body? What emotions come up? Okay, now stay with it. What memories come? Oh, well, I don't know. I was 12 and my father, stormed out and I never saw him. What stories are associated with it? So we start to explore that way. And then what resources? What's there? What have you learned, when you're about to, feel like you were going to collapse or get enraged? What have you learned? And then I can add a little bit of medicine, but actually the real mentoring is to listen and help them find that they have the medicine. They've just been looking in the wrong place, basically.
It is remarkable. And it's funny, you mentioned John Donahoe, because the way that happened was he saw our Wisdom 2.0 conversation, and he called me up. He said, "Can you get me in touch with Jack Kornfield?" And I said, "Yeah, I think I can." Anyway, Jack, what I think was remarkable, though, is, and all these people, there are big egos involved. I don't mean John, but I know a lot of the other people you work with, and and it's often, I'm always amazed at your ability to strip that away, at least momentarily, from people.
Suffering does it. It's not me.
Yeah, but most of those people aren't used to admitting that they're wrong or have done anything wrong, or that it's not their fault, or that, because they are the superhuman, and how could I possibly, be one that's either suffering or causing suffering. And I think
it's in 12 steps. Is it called like the gift of desperation or something like that?
Yeah.
It's the first noble truth in Buddhist teachings.
Right.
That you have to recognize that there is suffering. Not that life is suffering, but that it has it. But that's not the end of the story. If you get stuck there, you get stuck in your reactivity and your fear. But the fact is that that's just the first noble truth. And what it says is, this is the first part of the story, but in fact, there's a path to the end of it. There's a path out of grasping, out of fear, and so forth. You can find an inner dignity and a well-being. It means letting go of some things to become a better human being in some way.
Corporations are not usually beautiful places, and the reason for that is there are tough decisions that have to be made, and people's lives are impacted. And all you can do is to try and minimize it. And so, for instance, we're changing as a company. We're a 120-year-old company, and we were built on the internal combustion engine and the assembly line and all that, and that stood us in good stead for many, many years. Well, then, and I remember my own journey, from when I was growing up as a child, everything was great about the auto industry. People wrote songs about it. The Beach Boys were singing about it, and it was all good. And then, when I got into college and I started to realize that, maybe it wasn't all so good. There was, pollution, and, it wasn't called global warming back then, but it was environmental impact. There were safety issues. There was congestion issues, and it really opened my eyes. And so, anyway, I almost didn't join because of that. And then I thought, no, if I can actually go and make a difference, I'm determined to. But as we're changing now into a very different kind of company with electrification and being less hardware, more software, people's lives are being impacted. And there's no way around that. And I hate that. It's the worst part of the job. But you can't avoid it, because part of compassion, I believe, is doing the right thing for the most number of people. But that doesn't mean everybody. And that's the part that, that I think probably never will change in corporations. It's the part I hate. But it is inevitable, because change is inevitable, and change is good, actually. But with change comes upheaval, and with upheaval comes some pain for some people. And so I think, and I've thought about this a lot, is there a better way? And the short answer is I don't believe there is. I think it's just the way business is. Every business, and even the best businesses, have to continue to reinvent themselves, and that will have an impact on people, because somebody who was perfect for this model, all of a sudden their skill set doesn't really fit into this new model. And all you can do is to try and be as compassionate and to listen and to try and help them then land on their feet wherever they might go. So it's a never-ending thing, and it's tough. It's the hardest part about business, but you can't wish it away. It's there.
You're expressing something very clearly, and there's a lot of pain in it.
There is.
I also hear you simply talking about leadership, because in lots of other arenas as well, leadership requires making decisions because there's limitations in resource, or there are people not operating the right way and so forth. Making decisions where some people will be lost or disappointed, even though it's the best decision you can make. So people who are in an inner MBA program, right, you want to be leaders, baby? Get what you're signing up for, because you're not going to sleep well on some nights, and it will tear a little bit at your heart.
It does.
If you're trying to be compassionate, you also have to feel that, so that your decision comes from a place of understanding rather than a place of cold economy or something.
And that's what, I think most leaders, I'm not big on advice, because I think most people have to sort of sort things out for themselves. But if I were to give advice to, a group like this, I think it's, you have to have values, you have to have compassion, but you have to make decisions, because no decision is a decision. So you can't, and you must move forward in the business. But I would also say this, the mistakes I see most leaders make is that they surround themselves with yes people. They don't know the employees down at the shop floor level, and they don't know their families. I mean, one of the things that I love most about my life is that, I at age 65, I'm still playing ice hockey, but I'm playing in the Ford Hockey League with our employees. And I love that, because I get to know employees that I wouldn't get to know otherwise. My kids all played in the little leagues and all the towns we were in, and with our employees at all levels. And you get to know the husbands and the wives and the siblings, and and then though, if something happens and those people, you really feel it. You really feel it, because they're not just numbers; they're family members. I mean, in a broader sense. I mean, they're part of your broader family. And so, I cherish that, but it makes it harder too. And I guess the one thing I would also say, for last bit of advice, is keep your old friends, because the friends that that you've known for years, and you don't have to, but the friends that don't want anything from you in business and will tell you when you're being an idiot, they'll tell you, that they think you're absolutely wrong on this, because so many leaders just are in an echo chamber. And it's debilitating, not just for them, but for the whole company.
The well-being.
Yeah.
So two things. One is a little bit of a non sequitur, but it's about advice, because you said, you don't give much advice. When I was in my first clinical class doing PhD, and I had this grizzled old psychologist who ran Gardner State Hospital in Massachusetts, and he'd been a psychologist therapist forever, and he leaned forward. He said, "You're going to be in a position of responsibility. People are going to look up to you. They will really listen to you. You're going to affect their lives. So you have to be tuned in. You have to really be careful, because they respect you. So be careful what you say." So we all are sitting there kind of trembling. And after a little while, he laughs. He says, "But don't worry about it too much, because they really do just what they want, and they don't listen to you much at all." And it was really great. It helped, say, yes, there's advice, But I think really we learn from each other. We don't learn so much from the words. As you know, as a parent, they're watching you so closely. What I've learned, which is quite relevant to what you're saying, and part of the way that we've changed our teaching, is we mostly do team teaching. And in the early years, I think that it kind of kept us on the straight and narrow, which was a little harder in my 20s and 30s in all kinds of relationships. We'll just leave it. But there's some way in which we learn more from each other than we learn from, the sage on the stage or the top down, what you're talking about, isolation. And I know even in teaching relatively new people, if I pause and there's some dilemma, how do you work with anxiety when all this is happening in the culture and then your kids are sick and you whatever. And one of the things I'll ask beside checking in is to say, all right, well, what have you learned that helps you? But then I turn to the group and I say, what have you all learned that helps you in this situation? And there's a kind of collective wisdom that comes out that's better than any of us individually could say. And I know that's true in leadership in general. You're describing that. So it's almost, it's like you're missing the boat if you don't have that.
Yeah, and I think, business is hard enough. And if you don't have strong interpersonal relationships in business, then it's so isolating. And frankly, it's no fun. Look, business should be fun too. We're not even talking about fun, but there's a lot of fun to be had in business, but it's with people. It's not fun sitting in your office, staring at a spreadsheet. What's fun is to, create cool ideas with your coworkers, to sort of get into the what ifs of the conversations, and then, and getting to know them and getting to know, what makes them tick and all that. I mean, it's just there's a lot of organic fun that can come of that. And, I think, business is hard. And if you can't have those interpersonal relationships and you can't work as a team, and if you don't have fun, then it's just all going to weigh too much on you. And it probably isn't going to be a happy thing for you. And nobody talks about fun in business, which, and look, I'm in a really tough business. It's a really tough business, and it has been for a long time, and a lot of competitors and lots of change and lots of, low margins and all those things. But it's also, I always look to have some fun in my day. And I think everybody should. But it comes from the teams. It doesn't, individually, it's hard to have a lot of fun.
Yeah. And what's the point of your life if there isn't some well-being woven into it? It's not meant to be a grim duty, whether it's work or some people take meditation as a grim duty. I go to therapy and I work out at the gym and now I'm going to meditate, and it just doesn't make it happy.
Right.
And then it doesn't actually serve you in some deep way. So here's a different question, which has to do with intention. One of the most powerful things in Buddhist psychology is setting intention and then also repeatedly setting intention. So you can be in a difficult conversation or, a difficult stuck place, and you can take a few breaths and ask yourself before you jump in with your answer or try to defend yourself or whatever. You can say, what's my highest intention inside? What's my best intention? And when you ask, at least when I do, if I, for example, might have some little conflict with my beloved wife, Trudy, it could happen. But anyway, before I just try to be right about it, I'll go, what's my best intention? And then I realize, I love her. I want this to work out. I want to express. My whole tone of voice changes in about 5 seconds by remembering that intention. And I remember going into Google in the office of one of their main vice presidents and so forth. And it's all open floor plan, but we were in this little glass room. So the doors were closed, but people around. And I lit a candle to make it, just to create a different space that it wasn't your usual meeting. That's all. It wasn't a big, we didn't make a big Buddhist whatever nonsense of it. We just lit a candle and took up half a minute to quiet down. And then I asked the group, this was, I don't know, it was a design or some forward-thinking group, what's your best intention for what we're about to do? People got quiet, and once they set that intention, it raised the bar, it changed the conversation. We weren't just trying to solve a problem or get along. It was like, how do we do something that had an uplift to it in some fashion or other? So I wonder what you know about that in terms of...
I know you've told me to do that, and I have a tough time doing it. It's part of our relationship is, I do tend to react before I set my best intention, but I'm working on it.
Yeah, you're the only one in the room that would ever do that, of course.
But no, you're right, and I think sort of hand in hand comes the notion of empathy. Trying to, I always try and take the other person's point of view, and even if I violently disagree with them, there has to be some good in that point of view, and I try and do that with our other executives or with anybody that at work that I'm working with is why are they doing this? And because the thing I think is really important in business, and this is something that I do say all the time, and I suppose this is the right intention, is you can attack the idea, but don't attack the person. And that's very hard to do. It gets, I've seen a lot of discussions get very personal very quickly. Or if somebody doesn't like the idea, well, that guy's an idiot, or that guy, has terrible intentions, or she doesn't know what she's talking about. And that's wrong. It's the idea, and because if you can't attack the idea, you never get to any honest discussions. But if you do attack the person, then it's over. But I see that in business and probably in life, but certainly in business, over and over and over again. And so I do say all the time to our team, attack the idea, don't attack the person. And I'm marginally successful at getting that concept across. I think, but it's important to get that out there. So that is an intention that I do have, it's hard even for me, but I say it all day to myself. And look, there are going to be times where there is somebody you simply don't like, or somebody you simply don't think is coming from the right place. Okay, you can be empathetic as you want, but at the end of the day, you may conclude this person is, not a great person, or doesn't have the right motivation, or whatever. It's
or destructive in ways.
Yeah, exactly. Then
it's very, very painful.
Then you deal with it. I don't want to be Pollyanna about it. But you need to start with that, I believe.
So, when you look at leadership outside yourself and look at wise leadership, do you have models? Are there people that you reflect on and say, yeah, this is, I admire, or there's a lot to learn? I'm not looking for perfect leadership, because nobody's that.
Well, it's interesting. There have been a lot of people that I admire over the years, and frankly, I look to you all the time. But in business, there have been, many people when I think back that I've admired, but nobody that I want to emulate. And the reason for that is I think everybody has to have their own path. And I've seen Jack, I've seen this too, where I've seen at Ford business leaders try and copy another business leader. It's just phony. It doesn't, and I think most people have a great BS detector. I just do. And so employees pick up on that in 2 seconds, that if you're being phony or being someone you're not, so I've never tried to pattern myself after anybody. But I feel like I can get wisdom wherever I can take it. So, I read a lot, I listen a lot, I ask a lot of questions, and I've come across some remarkable people in my life that I value. But I don't hold anybody up as my role model, if you will. And maybe that's odd.
I respect that a lot. There's Warren Buffett. Okay, you're not going to be Warren Buffett.
No, and he has his strengths and I have mine. And
exactly.
If I tried to be him, it wouldn't work.
I was sitting on stage somewhere with a bunch of industry leaders, just for the fun of it. The lamas and mamas and swamis and so forth, all these celebrated. And the thought occurred to me, not the most noble thought, who's more enlightened? Where do I fit in the pecking order? As if that even the word enlightenment is really a confusing word that I don't use much anymore. I'd rather say who's more loving, who's more, compassionate. But then I realized I can't be like that one or that one. They may be really good. They're also really weird, but that's another conversation. But I couldn't do that, whether they're more or less whatever. Exactly what you're saying. I just have to be myself and just be the best that I can.